Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Pulumi for IT Pros. This week we're going to have a look at loops. So it's a fairly common scenario where you're going to want to deploy multiples of a resource. Multiple storage accounts, multiple virtual machines, whatever. You're going to want to create more than one of them, and rather than defining them individually in your code, you're going to want to add a loop and just be able to pass in a number of how many you want or a list of what you want. So that's what we're going to have a look at today, is how can we do both of those things. So we're going to, with just a plain old, I want 3 of these, and then also a list of what I want, perhaps with a name in the list or something like that. We'll see what I mean in a minute. So let's have a look at how we can achieve that using Pulumi. So we're back over in VS Code. This is the same code we had last week for episode 3. So we're pulling in all the config values from the config file and so on. And if you recall, we've got a storage account here. We're creating one of these. So what we're going to do first is we are going to change it up so we can create X number of storage accounts. So however many we desire. Now, this is where one of the real benefits of Pulumi come along. If you were doing this in Bicep or Terraform, you would have to use the looping functionality within that language, which, in my personal experience anyway, is not fantastic. Here, Pulumi doesn't have a loop. Pulumi just lets you use the loop that's built into your programming language. In the case of what we're doing here is going to be Python. So let's see how that works. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to go over to our config file here, and we are going to add another config setting. I'm just going to do it manually into the file here. You can obviously use the Pulumi config command at the CLI as well if you wanted. We'll just prefix it with Pulumi like all the other ones. Spell it right. And then we're going to say storage count. And we're going to set that to 2. So that's how many storage accounts and that's not the right prefix, is it? Sorry, I'm not doing a very good job here. So yeah, that's the prefix we need, and so prefix, value, or name, sorry, and then value. And so we're going to use that as part of our loop. Now, if you remember, we've also got our test environment, so let's just set that to 3 as well, just to be slightly different. So we've got that in our config file. So we want to pull that in. I'm going to put that into a variable. You don't have to. We could use it directly in the loop, but let's just do that here. So we're going to say stg_count is config dot require, and then the name of that value, let's just make sure I spell it, to the storage count. Copy and paste that, go to the right file. Okay, so that's now stored in there. So what we need to do now is we need to create a loop using Python's looping language. And in this case, we're going to do a for loop. Now, Python is slightly different to other languages, and it doesn't have a distinction between a for and a for each. What we're effectively doing first is a for loop, which is what it's called in Python, but the for each is very similar, and you'll see that when we look at that in a minute. But this is just the word for, and then we're going to say, now because we're using a numeric one here, we're going to call the value. I'll explain what this means in a second. And then in range, and then stg underscore count. And then because Python is syntax related, you need to tab that in a bit so that's all within the for loop, and we need a colon at the end there. There we go. That's it. That's all we had to do to create that loop. So just for those who aren't familiar with Python or for loops in general, what we're saying here is for I. So I is the variable that we're going to stick the number in. So for each loop, I will become the number. So 1, 2, 3, and so on. And then we're saying in the range and this number. So this is a bit of a shorthand. So actually what you could do here is you could, if you want to write the full thing, then you would say 0 storage account. So this is in the range from 0 to whatever the storage account value is. So in our case, 0 to 2. Python indexing is 0 based, and we're going to come on to, we have to deal with that in a minute. But there is a shorthand here. If you're just doing this 0, you want to take the full range, you can just do that, and that'll just take you from 0 to maximum. That's what we're going to do here. Now, I mentioned this is going to be a 0-based index, so if we did what we did here, we'd actually get 3 storage accounts, even though we added 1 in. Sorry, we added 2 in the settings. So we need to make some changes here to make sure that's the case. So the first thing is, and then I've just realized that I've done this now, storage here is a string. So this isn't actually going to work. So we need config will require, if you remember, results in a string. So actually, we need a different method. There should be a require int. There we go. And that should now make storage account to be int. Yep. Now, as we said, that's going to give us 1 more than we need. So we can just do -1 on here, and that'll ensure that we are get the index correctly. Now, there is an alternative approach we could do here. Instead of doing that, we could remove that, and we could do that. So that goes from 1 to storage count rather than 0, so we won't get the additional option. The other thing, obviously, you could account for that in your config file, but that's going to look really weird in the config file. Now, this, I think, is actually probably a better option, because if we did what we did there and subtracted the 1 from here, it would start with 0. So we get 0 and 1 effectively as the values. We want to use that value in our naming because we need to make sure that the storage account names are unique. And so we need to use that number as part of our name. Now, if we subtracted 1 from here, you would get 0 and 1. So you get storage account 0, storage account 1, which is probably not what you want. You want 1 and 2, just what people are used to. So we need to amend the code to actually use that now. So at the minute, this will fail because it will loop. The first storage account will get deployed. It'll get to the second one and try and deploy it with the same name because this is our account name here. It's still not, it's not unique for that loop, and so it will fail. So what we need to do is we need to get rid of that and do +i. I think that will work. I'm not, as I say, I'm still learning Python, same as you. Because that's an integer, but you're trying to append it to a string, I think it will turn it into a string. But we'll see. If it complains, then we'll know that's not going to work. But that'll add that number to the end of this. So what we should then get is 2 storage accounts with the name prefix stg1, stg2. That's what should happen. That's pretty much it. Now, we do have a slight issue here in that this last section here will not work because of the way that obviously it's not being looped either. What will actually happen is the value of stg will obviously be overwritten each time you create a storage account. So the container will only be added to the storage account, the last storage account. So what we can do, this is probably the easiest option, is if we just tab that in, that then means that this is inside the loop as well. And because it's pulling the name from that stg value, then it will just use that value to create that, and we'll end up with a container in each storage account. That's what should happen anyway. So let's go ahead and see what this does and see if my understanding of Python loops is actually correct. So we're back over in the command line, and we should be able to do, well, first we want to make sure we're in the right stack. So I ran this a minute ago, but we are selecting the dev stack. So let's just do that again, just to make sure we've got the right stack selected. Enter the passphrase. Okay, and now we're going to do Pulumi up, and we are going to make sure that it's using the right stack here as well. We could do either of those options. Because I selected that stack, and we don't actually need that, so we'll go ahead and do that. Passcode again, and let's see if it works. So what we should end up with is 2 storage accounts, and it's probably going to delete the old storage account as well. Okay, so that hasn't worked. So let's see what I didn't do properly. Okay, so here's the error here. Can't concatenate string and integer effectively. So I was wrong, it won't do that. So let's go and figure out how you concatenate a string and an integer in Python. Okay, so there's a few options we can do here, but the simplest and easiest option is to use the string conversion. So we just use the str command, brackets, and then the integer value, and that'll convert it to a string. And that should do what we want. So let's go back to the command line, and let's run it again. I tend to leave these things in, these errors and whatever, because I think they're useful learning experiences. If you disagree and you'd rather I cut them out, I'm happy to, so just let me know. So what's going on here then? We've got a few changes. So we're going to update the resource group. There's a tag being changed for some reason. I'll have a look, I'm not sure where that is. But the storage account is being changed, but it doesn't look like we've got an additional one. Let's have a look. So let's look at the details. So we've got a resource group. Yeah, so it's deleting the storage account, and then it's it's replacing that storage account with the new naming convention because we haven't got that 0 anymore. So we've got IT Pro Dev Storage 1. Yeah, it's creating the replacement. So we haven't got the additional storage account. So I'm going to go ahead and run that, and just to see what actually comes out at the end of it, as to why we don't get the second storage account that we're expecting. Okay, so as it said it would, it only created the 1. If we go back over to VS Code, the issue here is that Python actually takes into account that 0-based indexing for you and already subtracts 1 from the value. So we don't need to do that. So actually what we can do here is do this, which is slightly confusing. Yeah, if we wanted to, we could, to be honest, make it easier to read by doing that instead. And then let's do I plus 1 over here. So what we're saying there is we're going to use the value that's in the file, that's straight up here. So that'll take care of them being 2. But if we left it at that, we would get storage account 0 and storage account 1, which we don't want. We want 1 and 2. So we're going to add the +1 here in the naming piece just to make sure that's consistent with what we want. Sorry about that, slightly confusing. So let's go ahead and run that and make sure that does actually do what I think it will do. So we should see now it's going to create the second storage account. Oh, yeah, okay. There's another problem. So go back to VS Code. So the thing we didn't take into account is this, obviously, this account name is the name of the storage account in Azure. But this is the name of the storage account that's stored in the state file. And again, that's not unique because it's going to get repeated for both of them. So again, we can use the same bit of code and just append the index to the end of that. That is then going to recreate the first one because this name in the state file has now changed. So what we should see, if we go back to the command line, we should see it wants to delete and recreate one of them and create a new one. Yeah, there we go. So it's going to delete that one called STG in the state file, and then we're going to create STG1 and STG2. Again, these names here are just the names in the state file. They're not what will get created in Azure. So let's go ahead and create that. And we should hopefully then see those in Azure. Okay, we might have to tweak this slightly. So this is a slight issue with the way that the order is done here. It hasn't recognized that it needs to delete the existing storage account before it creates the old one because they're not links in the Pulumi things. They're just a replacement of that. It doesn't know that the thing in Azure that we're recreating has the same name as the old one that's being removed. And so it tried to do the create first and obviously failed. Now in this scenario, we don't have a lot here. So the easiest solution to this is going to be to do a destroy and just clean it up. The other option we could do is selectively destroy resources. There is some command line tools we can do to actually do that. But for now, to keep things simple, we'll just go ahead and just do a Pulumi destroy. And we'll clean up everything and then we'll recreate it. We don't have anything in there that's we need to keep, so we can just delete it and recreate it, and that'll make our life a bit easier. And when you're doing development, that's often a bit quicker if you get into this sort of state. If, however, there is stuff you need to keep, you can look at doing the selective delete. So when you do the Pulumi destroy, there is a flag you can add to the command line where you can give it a specific resource URN, which is the actual resource in the state file for it to clean up. We'll cover those more advanced state management stuff in another video. I don't want you to get too concerned about those, but we'll go ahead now and just recreate that. And hopefully we should end up there with our 2 storage accounts. Now, obviously, everything I'm talking about here could be applied to any Azure resource. I use storage accounts just because they're quick and easy. It doesn't take very long to deploy them. They're cheap, and they're very easy just if you want to play around with. It's not going to cost you anything unless you put some files in them, and even then there's a lot of free allowance. So they're a good tool just to get familiar with it. We are going to do some more advanced stuff as we move on, but just to get the hang of this, it's a good idea to practice with things like storage accounts. They're nice and easy. Okay, so that hopefully should all have created everything. So let's hop over to the portal, and this is the resource group. This is the old storage account, so let's hit refresh, and we should see in a minute when it's finished with dealt with caching, and we should see those resources turn up. Hopefully. No, there we go. So we've got our 2 storage accounts, and if we go have a look, we should have a container with the same name in that storage account, he says. Okay, so doesn't look like it's created the containers, which is a valid point. We didn't see that in the Pulumi code, in the command line. So let's go back, have a look. Why is it not creating the containers? Because we haven't got the config require bool. I imagine that's set to false. Yeah, so let's set that to true. And let's switch back to the command line and let's run it again. And we should get 2 containers with the same name, because we're not varying the name because they don't have to be unique. They're inside a storage account, but it should create 1 in each storage account. Except we've got the same problem. Again, hopefully it's useful for you seeing the mistakes I make. But we've got the same problem with the name of the actual container in the state file. So we don't care about the actual resource name in Azure. That can be the same name. And in a lot of scenarios, you might want the same container name. But we do need to add that number to the Pulumi name in the state file, otherwise it's going to complain about there not being used. So back to the command line, run it again, and hopefully this time we should be good. Okay, did everybody spot the error I made? That was fairly obvious. I added this here to the boolean that we're checking to see whether or not we create it, which is obviously the wrong place. So let's remove that. The name of the container is actually in the state is actually this line. So let's try that again. And hopefully that will work. Hopefully you weren't labouring under the illusion that even people who do this every day don't make stupid mistakes, because we definitely do. So there we go, we can see it's creating those two containers, 1 and 2, but they should have the same name in Azure. So let's just run that and make sure that we can then see those. So let's go back to the portal, and we should see this now has container 1. Yep. That was storage account 1, and if we go storage account 2, we should also see there is a container 1. Yep. So that all worked. Great. So back to VS Code, and we're now going to have a look at a different approach for doing this. And what we're going to do here is we are going to use what effectively in other languages would be a for each. We're going to loop over a list rather than just having a number. So let's go to our config file, and what we're going to say here, we're going to leave the other stuff in there, so we'll add another value. We're going to say that what we want here is a list of storage account names that we want to create. So we don't just want to define the same storage account name with a number at the end of it, but we actually want a list of names that we're going to use for creating that resource. So we're going to create a setting here called storage list, and then it's going to make it a list, and we're going to call it Pro Storage 1 and Developer Storage 1. Those are our names. So they're not something we could generate just using a number. We want to use this list of resources to be able to deal with that. I'm missing a colon there. So that's how we do lists within the setup. So what we need to do is read in that list. So we're going to create a new set of storage accounts. So we're going to just add it on the end. So we'll leave the other ones intact. And we're going to create a variable called storage list. And again, we're going to use config. And we're going to go again, if you remember from last time, we can use require object because this is an object we're pulling in. It's not a string or an integer or anything like that. And the value in here is going to be this storage list. Okay, and so that will put that into that variable. Now, the for loop is pretty much the same as the previous one. So it's for the name of the variable you want to put each iteration's value into. So we're going to call that account name. You can call this value, we called it I up here just because it's a number and that's sort of a convention, but you don't have to. But you can call it whatever you want. We're calling it account name, and then in, and then here, we just need to give it the list. So storage list, and then the colon, and that's all we need to do. So that will loop through that list and it will get the name out of that and stick it into this account name variable. So let's go and grab the same code from before because that's what we're using. We're not doing anything different with a storage account at this point, but obviously we're going to need a couple of things to do here to make this unique. So the first thing, let's get rid of the name in the state file here, and we're just going to call that account name to match there. And the same for the actual Azure name is going to go in there. Everything else is the same, so same resource group, same location, same tags and all that sort of stuff. But we're now looping through that list. So we're not using the number, the whole of the account name comes from that list in our config. So let's go ahead and try that and see if we've made any mistakes this time. Hopefully we should get another 2 new storage accounts that have those names from that list. Okay, so that looks good. You can see the name is those 2 IT Pro Storage and Developer Storage, and it's going to create those. So let's go ahead and create it. And we should see those appear in Azure as well alongside the other storage. Okay, this is not the fault of me or Pulumi, but these names are already taken. So your name in the storage account has to be globally unique. So let's go back over to code and we'll change those names. Now the nice thing, obviously these are configured in our config file, so it's easy to figure out. Let's just add some zeros to the end of those and we can just change those and then we can run it again. And hopefully somebody hasn't already used those. We will see. Go ahead and create that. Looks a bit more promising. That would have errored by now if it wasn't going to create them, so we should be okay. And there we go. They've been created. Hop over to the portal and we should see, if the page hasn't cached, we should see the new ones. They usually take a minute like we saw before. So those 2 are the old ones from the last one we created. What we should see is the new ones will appear. There we go, in a second. Developer Story 001 and IT Pro Story 001. Okay. We're going to take this a step further now. So we'll go back to VS Code, and what we actually want to do is not just define the name of the resource, but we also want to define the SKU. So we're going to change this in here from just being a simple list of strings to a list of objects. So all we need to do there is just change the value here. So these are going to have prefix with a property. And then we're going to add an additional option here for skew. And what we're going to do is, if we go back here, so if you remember on the skew here, we're using this value here. This uses the enum that comes from the Pulumi code. Now, we can't do that if we're passing it in from a value. The value in the config file is just a string. So what we will do is we will take this value and we will turn it into a string. So the skew value here is just going to be standard LRS. And the same here is going to be, and we'll make that standard GRS. Okay, so we're going to deploy the IT Pro storage is locally redundant and the developer storage is geo-redundant. So let's go back to our code, and we don't need to change the for loop, but now it's looping through a list of objects rather than strings. So account name probably isn't the right name for this now. Just to make it clearer, we're changing that. It's going to be account details. And so we need to count details dot name, and the same for this one. So that's getting the account details is the object now, and name is the property. And then over here, we also want to do account details dot skew. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. We've pulled in that list again, but the list is now a list of objects rather than strings. And so what goes into account details is the object. And then we use the object within here to get the properties, so for name and for skew. I think I've got the case correct there, but let's run it and see what happens. It may very well complain that I have not. So what we should see is one account will stay the same and one of them will be recreated. So this is complaining object has no attribute name. So it probably did need to be case sensitive. So if we look in here, no, the name, that is correct. We did save this, didn't we? Okay. Okay, so this comes down to my lack of understanding of Python. So the way you access that list of objects, the property is not using the dot notation, but we need to do the notation like that. So let's just do the same there, and then change, what's that command? We need to quote it. As I mentioned, I'm learning Python the same as you for this, so hopefully this is helpful just in understanding what we're doing with the Python as well. So let's try this again and see if that works. There we go. So we should see that there is a change going on. Yeah, so you can see the change being made is that we're changing from standard LRS to standard GRS on the dev one. We're also changing this one because the case is different. I don't think the case should make any difference. Azure doesn't really care, but let's see what happens. Maybe we have to go and match the case that's in here. As I mentioned before, that's the benefit of using the enum rather than strings, is we don't have to worry about that. But that does appear to have worked. So if we go over to the Azure portal again, and we just refresh that, and we look, our developer storage should be geo-redundant. Yes, it is. And our IT Pro storage should be locally redundant. Yes, it is. Okay, so hopefully you can see there with the loops, we've got quite a lot of flexibility around how we do loops and loop over lists, or you just use a plain old number, loop over objects. We can be very flexible, and none of what I wrote there was Pulumi specific. That's just the language features, in this case in Python, but obviously whatever language you're going to do there. So for loops and for each loops, if you've got a language that has distinguished between the two, are going to be the most common approach for this. Using a while loop isn't something you do much with infrastructure as code. So if you're not familiar, while loops are something that just keeps looping until a state changes. So there's no indefinite end. It's not like with a for loop, we went from 0 to 2. A while loop will just keep looping until the state of something changes. So for the most part, with infrastructure as code, you are deploying a defined number of things. There will always be a limit to how many you want to deploy. The only scenario where you might want to use a while loop, perhaps, is where you break out of the code, the Pulumi code a bit, and let's say you're waiting for some resource to come available before you want to then deploy another resource. That's not very common because most of the time when you deploy a resource with Pulumi, it's aware of the state of the resource and will not move on until the next resource is ready. But there are some resources, particularly long-running deployments, where it will return early, and maybe you could use a while loop for that. But for that, you'd have to break out of your Pulumi code and call some other APIs or so on with your C#, with your Python. We'll have a look at how to do that in a future video, but that's some more advanced pieces where your development skills will need to be reasonable to use. So we'll have a look at that in the future. But primarily you're going to use for loops and for each loops to do those of loops. And this is really powerful. You can make it really easy to change values in your config file. So you can just have, if somebody wanted to come along here and say, actually, we need 100 storage accounts, we could do that. That would give us 100 storage accounts. Similarly, in this option here, if we want to add another storage account, you can just copy and paste and add a 2 to the end, and there you go, you've got another storage account. There's no need to go and change the actual Pulumi code. I've done all that work up front to make sure that that's going to create the resources. I've determined which properties you can vary. So in here, the skew is what we can vary. We can't really vary anything else other than name, but I could define what that is. And if somebody's then using my Pulumi code to deploy an environment, they just have to come in and tweak the config file. They don't have to understand what I've done in my actual code, and they will deploy the resources they want. So yeah, that's loops. It's pretty straightforward. If you understand the looping functionality of your programming language, you'll be able to do loops in Pulumi. If you're just getting started with it, just try it out. Again, storage accounts, cheap and easy. You can deploy hundreds of them and it won't cost you anything. And just try that out and see where you go. Hopefully that makes a lot of sense. But if it doesn't, give me a message in the comments and I will happily come back to you. And that's it for this week. So I will hopefully see you all next week. Until then, have a great rest of your day.